The council told him to bring back a mineral. He brought back a war instead. Kenner watched the neon bleed across the wet floor of the bar and thought about how the end of the world always smelled like cheap perfume and ozone. Outside the porthole, Kansas Dome rolled past on its slow turn, 10 million people stacked under a sky that was no longer a sky. Inside, a woman in a sequined coat was singing a song his mother used to hum while she cooked, and that was the only thing in the whole filthy room that felt real. He had not eaten in 14 hours. He had a comm bead in his ear that would not stop blinking. He drank a glass of synthetic gin and pretended he could not feel it blinking. The bead chimed for the third time. He let it. The singer's voice climbed. Kenner closed his eyes. For a second he was 8 years old and his mother was alive, and the kitchen smelled of onions, and the war had not started yet. Then the bead chimed a fourth time, and the woman in the sequined coat hit a flat note, and the moment broke the way. Moments always broke. He tapped the bead. Kenner. Mars 6 is gone. He did not know the voice. He did not need to. He pictured the man it belonged to, gray suit, gray office, gray face. Council logistics always sounded the same. They were grown in the same room, fed the same food, taught the same flat way of saying a thing that would kill you. Gone how? Gone as in burned, gone as in stargone. They came through the gate at 0400 local, and by 06 it was a slag heap. 12,000 miners, 6 refineries, the whole orbital. We need the zircon, Kenner. We need the zircon yesterday. There is no yesterday. There is if you find the seam in oblivion. You leave in 6 hours. The boy is going with you. He opened his eyes. The singer had stopped. He could see the back of her head, gray hair pinned up under the sequins, and he thought, she is somebody's mother too. And somebody is going to lose her when the gate opens here. Phil is 22. Phil's father owns half the zircon refineries this side of the orbit. Phil's father wants Phil to see the dirt. Phil goes. Phil dies. Then Phil dies an educated man. 6 hours, Kenner. The bead went quiet. He sat there a while longer and listened to the room breathe around him. A boy at the next table was laughing too hard at something nobody had said. A woman 3 stools down was crying without making any noise about it. Somewhere a glass broke. The end of the world, he thought, was a series of very small rooms he paid in old paper. He tipped the singer more than he could afford. He went to find the boy. Phil was waiting in the corridor with the kind of grin that had not yet been corrected by anything. He had a new rifle slung over his shoulder and a girl on his arm. Sheila, blonde, sharp-eyed, smarter than the boy by a long mile and trying not to show it. Phil saluted. He actually saluted. Kenner did not return it. "Sir," the boy said, "I'm ready. You're not." "Sir, you're not, but you're going. Get in the rover." The rover was a long, low thing the color of dried blood. Kenner had not asked for the color. Council Logistics had a sense of humor that was not a sense of humor. He climbed into the driver's seat and ran his palm across the dash, and the engine woke up like an animal that had been waiting for him. He looked once at the dome above them, at the lights of Kansas turning slow as a wheel of saints, and then he drove east. The lock cycled. The dome shrank behind them. The world that had been blue for 40,000 years opened up rust red and ruined ahead. They crossed the perimeter at dawn. The land beyond the dome did not look like land. It looked like something the sky had thrown up and walked away from. Glass dunes, black rivers that did not move. The horizon shimmering in a way that had nothing to do with heat. Phil pressed his face to the window and went quiet for the first time since Kenner had met him. "How long has it been like this?" the boy asked. 60 years. My father said it would be green again in 100. Your father is in a tower." The boy did not say anything to that. Sheila reached across and put her hand on the boy's knee, and Kenner saw her do it in the rear mirror and felt something close to grief move through him, because he had seen that exact gesture from his own wife, a long time ago, in a kitchen that no longer existed. They drove for 2 days. They drove through the bones of an old highway, 3 lanes wide, that ran like a black scar across the dust. They drove past the carcass of a passenger jet that had come down on its belly and never rotted because there was nothing left in this air to rot it. They drove past a billboard advertising a brand of cereal that had not existed in 50 years. Phil read the billboard out loud and laughed, and his laugh was the laugh of someone who had not yet understood that everything he was seeing had once been somebody's whole life. Around noon on the first day they passed a town, or what had been a town. The signs were still readable in places: a diner, a gas station, a church with the cross half fallen. Kenner slowed without thinking. He had not meant to slow. The rover crawled. Phil leaned out and stared. Sheila did not stare. Sheila had grown up with old photographs of towns like this, The way other people grew up with grandparents, and she had learned a long time ago not to look at the grandparents too long. A dog came out of one of the buildings. A dog, after 60 years, skinny, wire-haired, three-legged. It watched the rover pass and did not bark. Phil reached for a ration bar to throw it, and Kenner stopped his hand. "Don't. It's hungry, sir. It's been hungry for 60 years. It'll be hungry tomorrow. We can't fix every hungry thing." The boy looked at him with an expression that was not quite anger. The dog watched them out of sight. Sheila wrote something down in a small notebook she had been keeping. Kenner did not ask what she had written. He had a guess. That night they camped behind a rock outcrop, and Kenner showed Phil how to set the perimeter sensors. And the boy got 2 of them backward and laughed at himself, easily, the way he laughed at everything. And Sheila moved the sensors quietly into the right positions while Phil was not watching. Kenner saw her do it. He pretended he had not. He decided he liked the girl very much and would never tell her so out loud, because saying so out loud was the surest way to make a young person afraid of disappointing you. The fire burned low. Phil fell asleep with his head on Sheila's shoulder. She held still for him, not moving even when her arm went numb, and looked at Kenner across the coals. "You don't think we're coming back, do you?" she said. Not accusing, just asking. "I think we are coming back," Kenner said. "I just don't think we'll be the same shape as when we left." She thought about that. She nodded once. She did not ask any more questions that night. On the second night, Kenner heard something crying out past the rocks. Phil wanted to ignore it. Sheila did not. Kenner stopped the rover and took the rifle and walked out into the cold by himself because he had learned a long time ago that there were some things you did not bring boys to. It was a child. He thought it was a child. Then he saw the second set of joints in the arm and the soft webbing between the fingers and the eyes. The eyes were the wrong eyes, too large, too dark, set too wide, and he understood. A mutie. One of the changed. Her foot was caught in a hunter's wire, and the wire had cut down to bone, and she had stopped trying to pull free, the way an animal stops when it has decided to die. She watched him come. She did not flinch. She did not make another sound. He knelt. He laid the rifle in the dust. He took the cutters from his belt very slowly so she could see what they were, and he said, "Easy, easy now," in the voice he had used on his daughter once in a hospital corridor before everything. The wire came away. She did not move. He lifted her, and she weighed almost nothing, and he could feel her heartbeat going so fast it was a hum, and he walked her back toward the rover with her face turned into his shoulder. Phil stood up when he saw her. "Sir, that's a mutie. I know what it is." "Sir, regulations. Sit down, Phil." The boy sat down. Sheila was already digging in the medical pack. The mutie child watched them all with those enormous dark eyes, and Kenner thought, "She is reading us, and she is going to decide whether we live." He cleaned her foot. He wrapped it. He gave her water from his own canteen, and she drank in small, careful sips, the way a creature drinks that has been taught not to be greedy, because there will not always be more. When she was done, she touched the back of his hand with one webbed finger, very lightly, the way a person tests stove. Then she closed her eyes. In the morning, she pointed. He drove the direction she pointed. They came over a ridge, and below them, in a sheltered bowl of dark rock, there was a village. Tents made of stitched hide. Cook fires. Children. Mutie children. All of them with the wrong joints and the wrong eyes, running between the tents and laughing. Kenner had not known that the change laughed. He realized he had not known very much at all. A tall figure came up the slope to meet them. Robes the color of old wine, a face that was mostly human and partly not. He carried no weapon. He spread his hands. "I am Lazarus," the man said. His voice had the slow, careful music of someone who had taught himself to speak a second time after something. "You bring back a daughter. I found her in a wire. The wire was not ours. I know." Lazarus looked at him a long moment. Then he looked at Phil and at Sheila and at the rover behind them, and he smiled, and the smile was not a politician's smile. "Come down," he said. "Eat. We have very little. You are welcome to it." They ate. They drank a thin green tea that tasted like copper and honey. Lazarus did not ask Kenner what he was doing in Oblivion. Kenner did not tell him. Phil was unusually quiet. Sheila held a mutie infant in her lap, and the infant chewed on her finger, and she laughed for the first time in days. An old woman with a face like a folded map showed Kenner a piece of cloth that had been her grandmother's, and pointed at the embroidery and said a name and waited. And Kenner understood that he was being introduced to a dead person. And he bowed his head the way you bow your head, and the old woman patted his cheek and said something to Lazarus that made Lazarus laugh. "She says you have a soldier's face." Lazarus translated. But you do not have a soldier's hands. She says this is good. She says hands tell more than faces. Kenner looked at his hands. They were scarred along the knuckles. They had buried his wife. They had carried in the Muti child from the cold. He did not know what they said about him. He hoped they said the better thing. And then the riders came. They came down the eastern slope in a long line, 20 machines kicking up a black wake, and the engines were the wrong sound. Wet, organ-deep, alien. Bandits, the village called them. But Kenner knew the sound. He had heard it on intel briefings. Those were not bandit engines. Those were converted alien tech runners. And that meant someone in this wasteland was being supplied by something that should not have been supplying anyone. The first round took a tent. The second round took Phil. The boy did not even have time to lift his rifle. He looked at Kenner with an expression that was not pain. Exactly. It was surprise, the surprise of a young person who had still half believed that the world was a thing that gave warnings. Then he went down in the dust, and his rifle clattered beside him, and Sheila screamed and ran toward him, and a rider scooped her up at full speed and was gone with her before Kenner could draw breath. Kenner did not draw breath. He stood very still, and the world narrowed to a single line, and he thought, very calmly, I am going to find that man, and I am going to take him apart. He felt the impact across the back of his skull a half-second later. The sky tilted. He saw Lazarus reaching for him. He saw the Muti child he had carried in from the cold standing in the doorway of a tent with both hands pressed against her mouth. Then nothing. He woke up to chains. The room was a stone room. The walls were old. Older than oblivion. Older than the war. And they had been carved into shapes Kenner could not read. The smell was iron and sweat, and something underneath that was not human sweat at all. He flexed his wrists. The chains held. He flexed his jaw. A tooth moved. He grinned at the ceiling, because grinning when you had nothing else was a thing his father had taught him. He took inventory the way they had taught him to take inventory. Both legs working. Left arm strong. Right shoulder stiff but functional. Ribs bruised, not cracked. The cut on his scalp had stopped bleeding. He had been kept alive on purpose. He had been kept whole on purpose. That told him something. They wanted him for something. He filed that neatly in the part of his mind that had survived 4 wars and would, with luck, survive this one. A door opened. Light. Boots. A man came in. The man was tall. The man was thin. The man wore black armor that had been polished by hand for so many years that it looked wet. The man's face was... Kenner squinted. The man's face was wrong. Not Muti wrong. Wrong in a way Kenner had seen only in classified files. Symmetrical the way a doll is symmetrical. Skin too smooth. Eyes too still. Kenner, the man said, you have the advantage. They call me the bishop. I run this part of Oblivion. You run nothing, you serve. The bishop tilted his head. The motion was a fraction of a second too slow. Kenner had been right. There was something inside that man that was not the man. You're sharp, the bishop said. I had heard you were sharp. Council Logistics sends only their best to die. Where's the girl? Alive. For now. Where? You'll see her, in the pit, or what's left of her. I haven't decided. Kenner studied him. He let himself look. Under the cosmetic perfection of the face there were small, telling things. A vein at the temple that pulsed at the wrong rhythm. A flicker behind the eyes that was not a flicker of muscle. A stillness around the mouth when the rest of the face moved. The bishop was not human. The bishop was wearing a human. Somewhere in the deep wastes of Oblivion, the alien gate had cracked open just enough to let one of them through. And they had found a body. And they had crawled inside it, and now it was running gladiator games for sport, because that was what its kind did when they were learning a new species. They ran experiments, and they called the experiments entertainment. What do you want? Kenner asked. I want to watch you fight. The bishop smiled. It was a learned smile. I want to watch the great council operative die in front of his trainee's girl. I want her to scream when you fall. I find the screaming, he searched for a word, the way a translator searches educational. You'll find it educational when I kill you. The bishop laughed. The laugh was perfect. The laugh had been practiced. You may try, Kenner. The pit is at sundown. Eat, drink, compose your last sentence. The good ones always have a last sentence. He left. The door shut. Kenner sat in the chains and did not waste energy on rage. He had been in cells before. He had been in worse cells than this. He worked through what he knew. The bishop was a passenger inside a host. That meant the host had been someone. A man, once with a name. That meant the host body had vulnerabilities that the passenger did not yet fully understand. That meant if Kenner could put the passenger in pain, the host might surface, just for a second, and a second was all a man needed. He worked his wrists against the chains until the skin gave. He bled. He kept working. He hummed his mother's song under his breath, the one the woman in the sequined coat had been singing, the one about the river and the bird. Hands worked better when you sang to them. His mother had taught him that too. A guard came in once to check him. The guard was human. Only human, no passenger. The guard's face was the kind of face that has stopped asking what it is doing. Kenner studied that face and did not waste a word on it. The guard left. Kenner went back to working the chain. Later, he did not know how much later, the cell had no windows. A different one came in. This one carried a tray, water in a tin cup, a piece of gray bread. The man sat down where Kenner could not reach it and stood looking at him for a long time. "Your counsel," the man said finally. Was what? Was counsel. The man was quiet a moment. He had a face that Kenner could see a story in if he looked at it sideways. Gaunt cheeks, an old burn scar down one jaw, a wedding band on a finger that had gone too thin for it. "You ever been to Kansas?" the man asked. "Yes. My wife is in Kansas." Kenner did not say anything to that. "I came out here 12 years ago, the man said. "I was going to find work. I was going to send back money. The bandits took me on the second week. They didn't kill me because I knew how to fix engines. They keep me alive because I keep their machines alive." He looked at the chain on Kenner's wrist. He looked at the tray. He pushed the tray closer with his boot, just enough that Kenner could reach it. He did not bend down. He did not put his hand anywhere near Kenner's. He had not survived 12 years by being a fool. "If you get out of here," the man said, "I am not asking you to come back for me. I know better than to ask that. I am asking you to find a woman named Eliza in Kansas Dome, level 4, the laundry on Spencer Street. Tell her Tom is alive. Tell her she should not wait. Tell her I said so. Tom, yes, I'll tell her. Don't promise. I'm not promising. I'm telling you what I'll do." Tom looked at him a long moment longer. Then he left. The door shut. Kenner ate the bread very slowly, because he did not know when there would be more, and he drank the water in small, careful sips the way the Mucci child had drunk from his canteen. And he thought about a woman named Eliza on Spencer Street who had been waiting 12 years for a man whose face she was probably starting to forget. He went back to working the chain. They came for him at sundown. The pit was the inside of an old stadium. He understood dully that he was looking at the ruins of a place where humans had once watched other humans throw a ball, and the sheer obscenity of how it was being used now sat in his stomach like a stone. The stands were full. Bandits, mostly, some muties, in chains along the lower rows, made to watch. And there against the far wall, behind a glass partition that was not glass, Sheila, bruised, alive. Watching him with the dry-eyed steadiness of someone who had already finished crying, he nodded to her. Just once. She nodded back. Just once. The crowd roared. A door opened on the far side of the pit. The thing that came out was not human. It was not muty either. It was something the bishop had brought back through whatever crack in the world he had crawled through. 6 legs, an upper torso that was almost a man's torso, a head that had teeth in the wrong places. It moved beautifully. Kenner respected the way it moved. He had been taught very young to respect dangerous things on their own terms. The bishop stood up in his box. He spread his arms. He gave a speech. Kenner did not listen. He had heard speeches like that before. He was busy watching the creature's gait, busy watching the way the third leg on the left dragged a half-second after the others, busy listening to the sound the foreleg joints made each time they extended. He counted. He counted again. He marked the rhythm in his head, the way his mother had marked the beats of her river song, with a wooden spoon against the rim of a pot. The bishop dropped his arms. The creature came. Kenner did not run. He did not even raise the spear they had given him, a useless ceremonial thing, made for show. He stood at dead center of the pit and waited, because he had counted, and the creature had a rhythm, and rhythms were the oldest weakness in the world. He waited until the 3rd step. He waited until the 4th. On the 5th step, when the dragging leg was at full extension, he moved not toward the creature under it. He slid in the dust. The spear came up. He drove it into the joint of that dragging leg, and snapped the shaft, and rolled out under the belly, and was on his feet before the thing knew its own leg was gone. The creature shrieked. The crowd shrieked back in a different key. It came at him on 5 legs now, faster, angrier, less precise. Kenner gave ground. He gave ground in a circle. He kept the broken leg on the creature's outside, the side it could no longer compensate for. He waited. He hummed. 3 bars of the river song, and on the 4th bar, the creature stumbled, the way he had known it would, and when it stumbled, he was at its throat with the spearhead, both hands on the broken shaft, and he drove the iron in, and twisted and put his whole body's weight behind the twist, and felt the thing's life go out under his hands. The thing went down. The crowd went silent. Kenner stood up. He was bleeding from his arm, his thigh, his scalp. He turned slowly until he was facing the bishop's box. He pointed at the bishop with the bloody spear stub. He did not speak. He let the silence do it. The bishop's perfect face did something then that the host had not learned yet. A tick at the corner of the mouth, an involuntary widening of one pupil. The passenger had felt something, fear, maybe, or something close enough to fear that it would do. Then the doors of the pit blew inward. The muties came in through the smoke. Lazarus was at the front, robes hiked up, an old rifle in his hands, and behind him were 30, 40, 50 of the changed, joints all wrong, eyes all wrong, moving with the deadly grace of people who had been hunted for so long that they had become very good at the hunt. They had been waiting, Kenner understood. They had followed the bandit's trail back. They had waited for him to be in the pit, so that the bishop's attention would be on the pit, and the mutie child he had carried in from the cold. Somewhere she had told them when to move. He found Sheila in the chaos. He broke the partition with the spear stub. She was already running before the glass hit the floor. She had a length of pipe in her hand. She had taken it off a guard. The guard was on the floor behind her, not moving. Kenner did not ask. He never would. They went for the bishop. The bishop was already gone. They found him on a balcony, mid-flight, scrambling toward a craft that should not have existed in this wasteland. Sleek, dark, alien, machine, the engines already lit. Lazarus raised his rifle, and Kenner put a hand on the barrel. Not yet. He wanted to see. The bishop turned. His face was sweating. The face was not supposed to sweat. The passenger was losing the host. Kenner could see it happening in real time. The eyes going asymmetric, the jaw clicking out of joint and back, the skin at the throat rippling as though something underneath was trying to stretch. "You're not the first one I've met," Kenner said. "You're just the first one wearing a man." The thing inside the bishop opened the bishop's mouth and said a sentence in a language that had no human shape to it. It was a sound like glass under a wheel. It was a sound that was meant to make a listener flinch. Kenner did not flinch. He had learned, somewhere between the kitchen and the war, not to flinch at what was meant to make him. "I don't speak it," he said, "and I'm not going to learn it." He let the bishop go. Lazarus turned on him. "He'll come back, I know. He'll bring more. I know. Then why? Because we need him to come back." Kenner watched the dark craft lift and bank and vanish over the ridge. "He's our message. We send him home and he tells whatever sent him that there's nothing here to take. And while he's busy lying about us, we set the trap." Lazarus looked at him a long time. Then he laughed softly, and the laugh had grief in it, and respect, and something else Kenner could not name. "You are a strange man, Kenner. I've been told." They went back to the village. They buried Phil under a stone the muties had cut for him without being asked. Sheila said the words over the grave. She did not cry. She had decided not to cry in front of these people who had lost so many more, and Kenner respected her for that and would respect her for it for the rest of his life. Lazarus stood at the back of the gathering, with his head bowed and his hands folded, and Kenner saw with a small, clear shock that Lazarus was praying in a language Kenner did not recognize, and that the language was older than English, and older than the dome, and older than the bombs, and that some part of what the council had called the changed had carried something forward that the council had thrown away. That night Lazarus poured a drink for Kenner from a metal flask. Real liquor. Old liquor, pre-war. Kenner had not tasted anything like it in 20 years. He drank a sip and gave the flask back, and Lazarus drank a sip and passed it on, and it went around the fire one mouthful at a time until it was empty. Nobody spoke while it went around. It was the most human thing Kenner had been part of in a decade. "Tell me," Lazarus said finally, "what did the council send you for?" Kenner watched the fire. He had been turning the question over inside himself for 2 days. He had known, on some level, what his answer would be from the moment he carried the mutie child in from the cold. But knowing a thing and saying a thing were not the same. He said it now. "Zircon, there's a seam under the eastern ridges. The council needs it for a weapon. Without the weapon, we lose the next war. With the weapon, we win the next war, and the war after that. And then the council finds another seam, on another world, under another people, and we do it again. That is what councils do." Lazarus said nothing. "They want me to map it," Kenner said. They want me to send back coordinates. They want a corporate landing team here in 9 months, with drills, and the drills will not ask whether your children are in the way." "And you," Lazarus said, "what do you want?" Kenner thought about his mother's song. He thought about the woman in the sequined coat, and the boy in the dust, and the Mucci child's heartbeat against his shoulder, and the bishop's perfect face cracking when the passenger felt fear for the first time. He thought about Sheila's nod from behind the glass. He thought about the cloth the old woman had shown him with the dead grandmother's name embroidered into the edge. "I want to file a report," he said. He filed it the next morning. He sat in the rover with the comm bead live and the council's seal blinking, and he spoke very slowly and very clearly into the recorder. Oblivion was a dead region, he said. The radiation levels were catastrophic. The zircon, what little there was bound in lattice structures so degraded by half-life decay that any extraction would yield 90% slag. Mining was non-viable. He recommended, in fact, that the council open trade negotiations with the indigenous population. Yes, there was an indigenous population, surprisingly resilient, surprisingly skilled at sifting trace minerals from contaminated soil. They were not muti in the regulatory sense. They were a distinct surviving culture. He attached false readings. He attached forged spectrography. He attached photographs of dead seams that were not the live one. He encrypted it with his own command key, and he sent it to Kansas Dome, and he closed the channel, and he sat with his hands on the wheel and breathed. A man who lies to a council for the sake of his own people is a traitor. A man who lies to a council for the sake of someone else's people is something else. There is not yet a word for what he is. There may not be a word for a long time. He sat in the rover for a while after he closed the channel. He watched the sun climb. He watched a thin line of smoke rising from the village cook fires, very faint against the bruised sky. He thought about Tom in his cell, about a wedding ring on a finger too thin for it, about a woman named Eliza on Spencer Street, who would maybe never know what her husband had asked a stranger to tell her. He thought he might find a way to send word, eventually. Not directly. Directly would cost the man his life. But there were ways. There were always ways, if a person was willing to be patient and clever and quiet about it. He filed it next to the other things he had filed since the chain. The list was getting long. He found that he did not mind. Lazarus came out to the rover and stood at the window. He did not speak for a while. He looked out at the same dust Kenner was looking at. Then he reached through the open window and laid one webbed-fingered hand on Kenner's shoulder, very briefly, and walked away. Kenner sat with the feeling of that hand for a long time. Sheila climbed into the passenger seat. She had a muti infant in a sling across her chest, the same infant she had laughed with on the first day, before everything. The baby's mother had not survived the raid. Sheila had not asked anyone's permission. She had simply taken the child and decided. "Where to?" she said. "Back into oblivion. We have work." "What work?" "They'll send someone else when my report doesn't satisfy them. 6 months, maybe 9. We have to be ready." "For what?" He looked at her. She was very young. She was very tired. He realized with a small, clean shock, going to be one of the great captains of whatever came next, if any of them lived that long. "For the war they don't know they started," he said. She nodded. She buckled the baby's sling. The baby reached up and caught a strand of her hair and pulled, and she did not pull away. "All right," she said. "Then drive." He started the engine. The Mucci child, the one he had carried in from the wire, was standing on the ridge ahead of them, very small against the bruised sky, watching them come. She raised one webbed hand. He raised his. He thought of his mother's song. He hummed the first bar of it under his breath. The rover rolled forward into the long red afternoon, and the dust rose behind them in a slow column that looked, from a distance, almost like smoke, almost like a signal, almost like the first word of something nobody had thought to write down yet. They drove past Phil's grave on the way out. Kenner slowed but did not stop. He thought about stopping. He thought the boy would have understood that you did not stop, that the road had to be eaten in long bites, that grief was a thing you carried in the passenger seat and did not put down. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his cap. Sheila did the same. The muti infant in her sling slept on and would never know whose grave it had passed. And that was, Kenner thought, the cleanest kind of inheritance. Far above oblivion, in a place the bishop had crawled back to bleeding, the things that had sent him would listen to his report. They would hear about a dead world, full of broken people, not worth the trouble. They would believe him, because they had built him to be believed. They would file it. They would move on to the next world on the next list. They would not look again. They would be wrong, of course. They had not yet learned the human language for that. They had not yet learned that a man with a flask and a song and a girl and a baby in a sling and a friend on a ridge was a thing it was very dangerous to write off as nothing. They had not yet learned that the rhythm a man hums under his breath in a stone cell is the same rhythm he will use to bring down a tower. They had not yet learned that a lie told in a small voice over an encrypted channel is the first move in a war that has no shape yet, and therefore no defense. But they would learn, in the months to come, in the long red afternoons, in the silences after the cook fires went out, in the things Kenner was already, even now, with one hand on the wheel and one hand humming on the dash, beginning to build out there in the dust where nobody from any council, on any world, could see. He thought of his mother. He thought of the woman in the sequined coat. He thought of all the singers in all the small rooms, hitting flat notes at the end of the world and being mourned by nobody but a tired man in a chair. He decided, with the small, private decisiveness of a man making a promise to himself, that there would be a next song and a next room and a next note, and that he would build the rooms himself if he had to, in the dust, in the dark, in the long aftermath of every council that had ever decided what a person was worth. The dust rose behind the rover, the song went on, and somewhere, very faintly, in a dome above Kansas, a woman in a sequined coat hit a true note at last, and held it, and held it, and held it, and did not let it go.